Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Spark of Genius Flesh and Blood production. It is not Rob on the top shelf there. I've replaced Rob with the Bravo aficionado, Mr. Alanlube.
Aficionado, wow.
I'll call him
Thank you.
Alan from Alanlube. You can find his channel in the description. He has a lot of Bravo content, and it seems to be like his bread and butter, so to speak
I
here.
do,
So
yeah.
we here, and by we I mean I, decided to bring Alan on to chat all about Bravo. Chat with his cat. His cat's it's got to have good opinions here. I mean, cats always have good opinions. Yeah, I know, I know. And so there's been quite a bit of an uptick in Bravo in the meta, and
Mhm.
Bravo being, I want to say, for the first time in contention for like a playable hero in Nats meta, because I can't.
Uh,
Or I'm going to say playable, and we'll talk about it. We'll talk
okay,
about it later. It depends. There's like a lot of things that people are kind of thinking about, right? So
yeah.
I think we want to kind of start off with Bravo, and then we're gonna have the top three lists kind of in the center. What people are looking at will be the Birmingham lists, so the three lists, which are
Mhm.
different. They do have differences
Yeah.
between that and kind of lists we run, and we'll talk about those lists. So a lot of Bravo stuff. So stay tuned for that. But I think for the baseline Bravo, what do you think? What do you think? I mean, Starstruck's the obvious one. I know you've already talked a bit about it, but what do you see like
Yeah.
fundamentally? Is anything changing for Bravo from the past like couple metas in terms of like what it's seeing? Kind of maybe cards it wants to take in, take out, that kind of thing.
So, I mean, outside of Starstruck, I think the main thing that people have caught on to since Oldham LL was that Bravo, with his armor suite, with Titan's Fist and Buckler, and with like three Sigil of Solace, does kind of ask the question of like, can you beat a semi-fatigue deck? Like, obviously, Bravo is worse at fatiguing decks than Oldham was,
Yeah,
but once Oldham LL, people definitely somewhat overcorrected in how they built their decks, and Lexi losing Bullseye Bracer also made her not as able to go over the top, and because of that, Bravo, for specifically calling Birmingham, was in a pretty good spot. But I think now that people have seen it and people have time to adjust, um, at strength isn't as great, but he's not like unplayable or anything. Like he still has merits, especially now. So yeah,
yeah. No, it's fair. We'll talk about it a little bit later about like going into the meta because definitely have some thoughts about like builds and such. But I think as far as like the core stuff, I do agree. Like Buckler, like Titan's Fist Buckler, which is hilarious that everyone's just like was shitting on Titan's Fist when it came out as like a
yeah,
usable weapon, especially in Bravos. Like Bravo's always going to
yeah.
use it Nothos. Bravo will never
I mean,
not use it Nothos.
to be fair, Buckler didn't come out until
It
Dynasty,
didn't.
so
It didn't.
yeah, yeah.
And no one used it until like now, essentially, right?
Until Winter's Whale was banned, basically. Well, yeah. Well,
Until
actually, no. Winter
until old
Oldham
MLL.
still used Rampart, yeah,
Yeah,
but yeah,
yeah,
Oldham
yeah,
LL. I mean, people have tried the Titan Buckler in the past, and
yeah,
like the main thing people talked about was like, oh, it makes your Terra Sunder worse because it comes in for 5 dominate instead of 7,
yeah.
and like on your Rouse turn, it's also pretty bad. But like, I don't know, people weren't too big on it, but once people put in like the three Siddles and possibly more like depending on whose deck you're looking at, then it was like, okay, this might work out.
It's pretty reasonable. I mean, three like it's just three flat life. Like it's really hard to
Yeah,
dissuade because like, oh, that's another sigil, like effectively, right? But they can also block on
yeah,
hits, so it's a sigil with upside,
hmm
really, which is
yeah,
hard to dissuade from. Like, just it's not even a legendary equipment. We need another legendary
hmm
shield. That's what needs to happen here. Um, I think that's also true. As far, it's kind of funny when you look at the other thing I want to kind of touch on before we go, and is the direct situation with Bravo. I feel like it's shifted like all over the place, right? Because we used to be running like blue,
yeah,
red, staunch, full fate, full sync, like blue unmovables.
yeah,
I've seen red unmovables too, even though I don't totally agree
yeah.
with those. But it's kind of funny. What do you think like our D-React situation is now?
I think if you look back to like Tales of Arya meta, which is like pre Everfest, it was
Yeah,
definitely very common to see Bravo lists with like upwards of 12 D reacts
no,
because Bravo mirrors were more prevalent. Dory was more prevalent at the time. Just people still didn't really figure out ways to maximize efficiency on offense in the
yeah,
Guardian deck. So maximizing your blocking power through D reacts and getting value there was usually the way to go. But as like time went on, Everfest came out, Runeblade was a thing, Starro was a thing, and well, let's exclude Starvo from the conversation because Bravo
Yeah.
was like basically unplayable during that time. Um, but basically, like cards like when Chokeslam started being added to the deck, Rouse, Terra Sunder, those were already in the deck, but people learned to play around them better. Just like you didn't want to clog your hand with D-Reacts if you had tempo. This was especially true for like the Briar matchup, the Fi matchup, where you needed to like hit them instead of just block, or else you would kind of die.
Yeah.
Um, and so you eventually saw a lot of lists cut more D-React staunch, like disappeared. You would still see blue unmovable, but never red. And sinks were still there, but you didn't really see fates. And
Yeah.
then now it's kind of circled all the way back around where the other decks in the format are still just doing more on rate things than you, and they have a good fridge if you're thinking like Fi or Briar. Even
Yeah.
Lexi now without Bullseye has Perch Grappler. She can block one important on hit. And so because of that, it seems like we've trended back towards the D-React as being the way to maximize the value of your hands and also pose the fatigue question at the same time.
Yeah. Because you're not really taking much away when you're adding gear. Like Crippling Crush is still Crippling Crush because you're always running like
Yeah.
37 ish blues minimum.
Yeah.
Kind of an interesting point. What do you think about the blue count situation? Like, I think for the longest time it's always been like 40 blues or die trying. It's like the stock standard.
Yeah.
Like, you need this to be consistent in any regard, regardless of how aggressive you are. But I've seen lists go 38, 37. Um,
Yeah.
more expensive pieces. Of course, like some of these lists are running, sigils, fates, like all these because zero cost, right? It doesn't really matter. Don't really need blues for that. What do you think about the resource curve situation in Bravo now for like kind of like the average list you'd see?
Yeah. So one little side note, if you see my camera moving, that's because my cat is bumping into my laptop, rubbing against it.
As
But
a cat does, yes.
yeah, but so I would say around Worlds and a little after Worlds, it started to become pretty commonplace for Bravo lists to run 40 blues. I don't think I've ever seen more than 40, but 39 was still a thing, 38 was still a thing. I would say a lot of people did like the 40 blue count, myself included, Patrick included, who got second at calling San Jose. But with the release of Starstruck, it was weird because you didn't necessarily want to cut blues because you still have a lot of expensive attacks.
Yeah.
You didn't necessarily want to cut reds either because those are your important attacks.
Yeah.
And now with like Fate Foreseen being back in the deck, three sigils being back in the deck, there's a lot more reds that you can run into every matchup. So the question is like, do you still want to keep a lean 60 to try and play like a more tempo aggressive, disruptive Bravo? But if you include the Starstrucks, you either have to cut blues, which lowers your consistency, or you cut the reds, which is also hard because you like all your reds. But I think what's happened is that more Bravos are simply just running more than 60 cards into a lot of matchups. So you can still have the high blue count, you can still have all these threatening on hits, and you can sort of somewhat flex between just like blocking and being patient and also trying to grab tempo when you can, if that's how your draws end up going or how the game ends up going. Um, for certain matchups, I do imagine Bravos could cut some of the D reacts if they wanted to be extremely aggressive. For example, like Fates, you could cut Fates and leave those in the sideboard if you wanted to just, smack away. Like if you know that your enemy Fi is on pouncing links and well, there's no stubbies anymore, but if they're on like Snap and I don't know, Blossom of Spring maybe, but yeah,
Yeah, I see where you're going. You stretch it a bit, but I see where you're going with
yeah.
that.
But yeah, that's probably one of the hardest questions that I've been trying to figure out is where to leave my blue count now. I kind of settled around 39 because I think the three yellows from Starstruck don't they're not really blues, but like having 40 blues and Starstrucks and
It's a
including
bit
all the reds
much.
that I want, it's a bit much. So
Yeah.
I've kind of just had to do, I guess.
Yeah, it's not too bad because like the Starstrucks, you can Unity block at a seismic. It kind of pays for its like
Yeah,
you get like a red choke slam out for a blue. It kind of like when you're not able to like tectonic, it kind of helps ish
yeah,
sometimes.
it's okay. Yeah, and like for matchups like Dash or Dromai, where you're siding out all your reacts and stuff. Like it
Yep.
can still pay for Zealous, and
Yep.
things like that. You can still throw a Spinal with a Starstruck plus a blue. So it's like
Right.
I've never run into a situation where I was like, wow, I really wish this card was a blue. Um, unless maybe you draw like Crippling, Starstruck, and two blues, maybe. But no,
Yep.
it
No,
happens. Yeah.
I either draw one blue, crippling spinal, or just like
Hmm.
all blues. It's not like I never have like the one resource. It's like you either brick or you just don't. I don't have like the one
Yeah.
off brick, which any Bravo player knows. That's why you just got to hit, right? So
Yeah.
that makes sense. I think the last thing. Actually, I think we could save anything else for the future pieces. So we're just gonna go through the lists now. The ones that topped um, the ones that top Birmingham. So we're going to start off with 5 through 8, then the semis list. It's nice because we have one per round, and Icelander just took them out one by one. We can talk about that
Yeah. Yep.
too. It's like people would be like, "Oh, it's the dream top 8." You literally just Bravo 3 times.
Yep.
Oh, I know a couple. I know one Icelander in particular who'd probably love that bracket. But then there's just like a lot of Icelanders just like, "Oh, it's so aggressive." But we'll talk about that too. So I got Luca Kramaric. Sorry if I mispronounced your last name there, guy. I got his list here first. Couple of key pieces. The equipment, nothing really super special. Pretty sad every time I see Iron Rot legs. I'm just like, holy shit, we're still not off this stupid leg piece. But you know what?
They should
That's
just
fine.
make a majestic piece that's exactly Iron Rot legs, but with cooler art and
Or
cold foil.
they should just make
Just
they should just make Fable Iron Raw legs.
yeah,
So,
Fable Iron Rot legs for Guardian.
prototype Iron Raw legs. It'd be
Yep.
pretty. It'd just be like a stick. It'd be pretty funny. Triple null rune. So null rune boots, gloves, hood, buckler, plating, Titan's fist. I think in the I don't actually. I think all the lists here on Fabry they don't really parse out the sideboard or anything like this. But I don't see any other additional equipment other than this. We do have Alan's favorite card, Red Blessing of Deliverance here. Luca is running the triple.
Yep.
So we'll talk about
Hmm.
that in a sec.
Hmm.
Double fates, so 2 red fates, 2 red pummels, probably something to note. One remembrance, also interesting, bringing in the remembrance. Triple sigil, triple sync, grandeur of Valahai. Didn't think I'd see that card in the list. I think it's the only one that's running grandeur,
Hmm.
which I find interesting. One stamp authority. It must probably just be. I'm guessing it's the filler blue. He's on 38 blues for context here, including the stamp and the grandeur. So the regular zealous. Warmongers is probably the newest edition that most Bravos are running, just because it can screw a lot of decks like Azalea, Rune Blades. It just kind of like you could time walk them, which is kind of nice.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
even Lexi's who have never seen the card before, they are still a non-attack and don't have trench or something like that. Like something we literally just
They are
saw.
still an arrow and they can't flip it. Yeah.
Yeah, they can't flip
If
it,
they
so
don't
they
have
just like
snap. Yeah.
yeah, just fire an arrow past. Yeah, if they have the snaps, it is a way to get around it.
Yeah.
But very good card. Still blocks for 3. It don't really care about Titan's Fist or anything like that. It's just comes in for 3
Mhm.
regardless. So it's what do you dislike about this? Let's start with the dislikes here.
So I've talked about this before with Patrick, but I hate Blessing of Deliverance
I
so
just like
much.
I just like pre-clicked it for you. It's just like on the screen in the
Yeah,
middle.
you're not even sharing. You're not even sharing
I'm not
screens
even
with me, and
sharing screen
you
here
you
yet.
just know. So
Yeah.
look, the card itself. I remember when I first started playing the game, it was Monarch Blitz, and I was on Bravo. And every time I played Blessing, I was like, "Wow, this card is so good! It just gives me free life, and I get to swing for 6. This is amazing." Um, but I think just the inconsistency is too much. If you play it and you draw a red, that is absolutely terrible. Um, assuming that you kept a 2 card hand to play Blessing of Deliverance, and you draw into a red, and sure, even if your arsenal is open, you could arsenal the red, but you essentially just kind of ended up paying 1 card to gain anywhere from 0 to 3 life, which is not great. And of course, you can always still block with it. It does block 3, so there's not a huge downside. Um, but it's just the fact that every time I draw it, I don't want to see it. That's just why I don't like the card. It's basically like if you draw it, you're incentivized to play it. You're like, I put this card in my deck for a reason, and then when you do play it, you regret it. And I think also another reason I don't like it is because if you're playing Blessing of Deliverance, which is a life gain card, you're wanting to fatigue your opponent to some degree. And usually in those matchups, you'll be running Titan Fist Buckler for the 3 extra life. And so that also lowers the rate of Blessing of Deliverance because you're pitching to play Blessing, you can make a Surge, sure, and then you swing Titan's Fist, which comes in 4 instead of the 6 with Anathos. So those two things coupled, I'm just not a huge fan of the card. Um, I think in very mid-rangey matchups like the Bravo Mirror or even like I guess Lavia maybe or Azuri,
Reinar or
maybe
something.
Reinar, Dory. Those matchups it can be okay. You can still run Anathos in those matchups to play more mid-rangey and you can get good value out of the card. But those matchups aren't exactly, in my opinion, the matchups Bravo needs help with. And so because of that, I don't think the card really needs to go in, but I just not a huge fan of the card.
Tell me how you really feel. No, okay. Well, we're other
I
than
have 3 rainbow foil extended arts
I
and
know,
they're going
same.
back in the binder.
Yep.
Back in the binder.
I think I have all the
I tried it
colors
out.
too.
Tried it out for one armory and I'm like, nope, this isn't it. This isn't it.
The extended art didn't make it any better, huh? It always still just
Mm,
missed. I would have thought they would just
it's
like always
still missed.
hit.
I was playing against a Kano and it revealed 3 reds and Kano was like, huh, kill you? And I was like,
Holy shit.
and no, and those reds didn't gain me any life either. It was CNC like pummel
They
sigil.
weren't
And
even
I was
3
like,
costs. Holy moly.
wow.
Well, you have sigil. Although he
Yeah, it
could just
still killed me
respond.
through it.
Yeah,
It
he
still
can still
killed me
just
through it.
respond
Yeah.
to sigil and just kill you before it resolves. This is pretty funny. Oh man. Oh, okay. That's
That's
tough.
great.
I don't think I hate blessing as much as you do, but I also don't like it. I'm very neutral about the card, but Bravo list is so tight that neutral just doesn't
Mm,
cut it anymore, right? There's a bunch of other
yeah.
cards I'd rather run, like Pulverize is a good example of a card that I consider kind of a little bit more on the fringe side. Like you might run 1 or
Yeah.
2 possibly, but like I'd rather
Hmm.
have space for a Pulverize that it can do a lot of work in certain matchups compared to Blessing, which
Yeah.
I'll usually gain 2 life, usually, not always, right?
Yeah.
Um, what do you think about? Let's go with the let's talk about the grandeur and the remembrance because those two are the ones that stick out. I think the other decks have fate pummel in different amounts, but remembrance and
Yeah.
grandeur, I do not know if the other decks have. So maybe start with remembrance, I guess. Though it's just the one remembrance here.
Remembrance, I'm also not a big fan of. I think that you could argue that it was a good card to play against Oldhim
Yeah,
or the Bravo Mirror
sure.
or maybe like Dorinthia Azuri if you're playing those matchups really slowly, sure.
Yeah,
Um, but I think just in general, how I like to play those matchups, I find tempo to be extremely important. Because if you're playing a Bravo mirror and you're the one blocking, eventually you're going to draw into like Zealous Pummel and they're going to hit you with Rouse, and you're like, wow, I think I lose off this. So I think having tempo is really important, and Remembrance is just a card that loses tempo. Doesn't pitch for Anathos, it's yellow, it doesn't block, and it's just if if both players are low rolling, then it's good because you make it to like 3rd cycle or whatever, and then you
sure.
get to play
Yeah,
it. You shuffle back 3 cripplings, and it's like okay. But I think that when both players are like really on top of it and they're pitch stacking like good threats after each other, then
yeah,
there's just not enough room to play the card.
it's true.
And that's why I don't like it. Even against Oldhim, like I've played against slower Oldhims that I could still beat without Remembrance, and it's just like um, making sure that you save your threat density for later and not like blocking with it too much and things like that.
Yeah,
Um,
no, for sure.
because yeah, so in that sense, I don't like the card, and I don't really see a place for it in the current meta game either because you're not going to run into Lexi, you're not going to run into Dromai, you're not going to run into Icelander. And those are probably the 3 matchups you're prepping for the most, and yeah, so I wouldn't run it. If I wanted a card that was better in the mirror, I would play Pulverize, not
Yeah,
Remembrance.
yeah, I mean we did play it into old him into the mirror, probably at
Yeah,
least 1 or 2 pulverizes,
yeah,
just because like such immense value. It's a 1 card for
yeah,
like you need 4 cards to block it, like a D react
yeah,
and such, and it's also, I mean, remembrance blows up pitch stacks. Like you can't.
yeah. That too.
That's the big one for me. I just like if I get this card early, I can't play it because I've started stack, and now I'm just wiping out my stack for no reason if I'm
Yeah.
actually going for that game
Mhm.
plan. which was my main issue until like the Oldham matchup. Essentially, it's like, well, shit, this was pulverized. I could just throw pulverize at them, and just like I'm probably up on card density anyways. But yeah, no, that's fair.
I mean, I think
But
maybe you could argue that Remembrance is okay if you're planning to just throw your attacks willy nilly. Like you have
yeah,
a surge, you have a crippling, you're just like undominated, throw it. I'm gonna get your cards, and I have Remembrance to get my threats back.
sure.
But
If you draw
that,
hot, I guess. Like if you actually want to be
yeah,
able to play them out.
yeah, and so that may work, but I haven't really tried to play like that per se, so I wouldn't really know.
That's fair. Grandeur of Valahai, the Everfest Fable. So
Hmm.
I have played this before, not in a defensive build. Obviously, it really does shine with more like 4 cost rets. That's kind of where it really shines because then it just like
Yeah.
turns your next one for free. If you create a seismic, spinal turns into a 3 cost. Like it just kind of snowballs off each other, right? And it makes it so you
Hmm.
just don't have to tectonic, which is quite nice in different kind of scenarios. So I definitely played it in the more like the Everfest build when Everfest just came out and people were just like playing a lot more aggressively, playing a lot
Hmm.
more like threats and stuff. I kind of see the grandeur, but I honestly think that in this list it's kind of like you're running blessing and then you're adding grandeur and you have warmongers and you have a lot of misses on blessing and this is just like an additional miss that just doesn't block, right? And you don't like
Yeah.
your only 4 costs in this list is choke slam, so
Mhm.
like you have spinals, I guess, but it doesn't work with zealous, it doesn't work with like rouse. Like it's like a very anti-synergistic with like a lot of the things in this deck, but I don't know how you particularly feel about it in the context of this build or in context of the meta if you want.
Uh, I honestly don't know what to think about it, but I know that I wouldn't run it just because I can't convince myself a reason why I would run it. Like sure, you can swing your hammer for 4 and make a surge, and then on the next turn you can throw choke slam to card 8. That's great value, but it's one card out of your 60 to 65 odds that you're gonna draw it into a situation where it does something positive for you seems to be really
Yeah.
low. The odds that you draw it in a situation where you don't want it just seems to be much higher.
Yeah,
Um,
especially
I
in this list specifically with blessings and like
mhm,
only choke slams. I don't really know where. Like I'd rather have a second stamp or something like that
mhm.
or I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's just like a fun card. Like even
It's a
if you
fable.
do run it, yeah, I don't think it'll really lose you that many games, honestly. But I don't think it'll win you that many games either.
Yeah.
So I would just want to err towards consistency and not run it.
Yeah. No, that's fair. I tend to agree. I even the aggressive decks, it was still like when it was when it was good, I was already winning, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like it never helped me come back from anything. Whereas Bravo generally like the card needs to either let you keep tempo, right? Because it's usually the hands where you get tempo and then you didn't stack, or you're not even on second cycle and you just miss, right? So you need something to get back from that scenario. Where something like a Warmonger's Diplomacy might actually get you back in that scenario when you miss. You can create a seismic, play Diplomacy, and Diplomacy might buy you the turn. You know what I mean? Whereas
Yeah.
Grandeur is not buying you anything here. So I do agree with that. I think we can move on to the next list here, which is
Yeah.
third place, so third, fourth, Sebastian's list. Equipment wise, definitely interesting. Only running one null rune, so only on the null rune boots.
Mhm.
I thought you might like that one. So only on the null
I,
rune one boots
okay,
does have.
I
Hey, you want to talk about
there
the null
is
rune right
a
away? Okay, let's talk about
yeah,
the null
sure.
rune.
Let's just talk about it now because also the past list had 3 null rune, right?
The pass list had null
Yeah.
boots, hood, and gloves. This one just has
Yeah, and
boots.
this one is 1. And
Yeah,
spoiler, I believe Pablo's only has null rune 2. So
it does have like
three
literally
different
three
choices.
lists. Yeah, three
Three
different
different
lists.
choices.
Yeah.
So I am on the side of 3 null rune,
Yep.
but um depends. If you were expecting to play Icelander, I am in the camp of I think Tunic plus 3 null rune is the way to go.
Yep.
I can see why. I can see the art. Well, we'll talk about Pablo's later. I can
Yeah.
see his argument for 2, and
Yep.
then 3 is like you kind of just want to be okay into Icelander and Kano. But I have talked to players before, but not bad players, good players, and they would be like, honestly, I just run AB1 because Kano is like kind of an auto loss anyways, so why bother there? And even Icelander, it's like even if you have the full hate AB3 plus Tunic, it's still a really hard matchup. So you could also just take the L there. However, I think with the recent string of Icelander victories, you kind of just have to prep for Icelander. Like you can't just be like, oh, it's an auto loss, it's fine. It's like no, there's
People are going to play
you're
that
definitely
hero.
gonna run into like 2 or 3 if you're planning to make top 8 of any tier
Yep.
3 event. So
Yep. Especially in top 8. They'll probably be. I'd hazard to guess there's going to be
yeah.
an Icelander there, and maybe you're going to be one of the Bravos they step on to win. You don't want to be one of those Bravos. But yeah, I'll say my comment after Pablo's because after the 2-0, we can kind of see how it went here. But there's a couple other things that Sebastian's list is actually quite different here. So you're starting off the first big difference. There's a down and dirty in this list. Um, that's pretty spicy. There is 3 E strikes. No
Mhm.
zealous, no zealous belting, but there are 3 E strikes instead. 3 fates instead of 2. 1
Mhm.
pulverize. Still 2 pummels. Hard to find though. Blue fighting spirit. Triple red staunch, so it's closer to the Pablo list. And
Mhm.
then the funniest card in the list, Hold the Line, which won him the game. Spoiler alert, against the Katsu. Hold the Line, blue, won him. I watched it. I watched him describe what Hold the Line did to the Katsu
What does
player.
that card do? Could you read it for me?
Yeah, bring it up for everybody. Because this was semis. This was
I'm
oh no,
just like,
this was his
what?
top 8.
Mhm.
I think this was the top 8 game that got him into semis. It was Bravo versus Katsu because there were 2
It was
Katsus
the
in top
Zephyr
8.
Needle game, right?
It was the Zephyr Needle game where Katsu kind of
Yeah.
gimped him, but Katsu was coming back to the game. Like Katsu
Mhm.
was coming back. So blue hold the line. Oh, it only comes in blue. It's majestic. It's a blue 0 cost. The attacking hero has drawn 2 or more cards this turn. Prevent the next 3 damage that would be dealt to your hero this turn. It is a defense reaction. It blocks for 2.
That's a blue block for 2.
It's a blue block for 2, cost 0. And then the text
Okay,
is if they've
so
drawn 2 or
it
more,
blocks up to 5.
it blocks up to 5, but the 3 it comes from prevention. Yes, it's the
Yeah.
next. It's also the next 3 damage, which is kind of nice.
Is
It's not
is
like
it one instance or is it like floating like Oldham Earth React?
I think it's floating. It just says the next 3
The wording
damage
makes me think it's floating.
because it
So
would be that would be dealt to your hero. So it's just the next
yeah.
3 damage that would be dealt. So I'm pretty sure it's floating, which is quite nice, especially in Takatsu. It did work. Sorry, the look on Takatsu's face is priceless. But so we have that hold the
What set did
line.
this card come in? Am I Mandela affecting myself? Do I
No,
not know this card?
it's Dust Till Dawn. It's Dust Till Dawn.
Oh, okay,
It
okay.
just came out. It just came out. It was like probably the spiciest card I've
Yeah,
seen
light.
in a little while.
Yeah.
So we have one of those. So we could talk about the Finals Fighting Spirit a bit later because that's in Pablo's. Staunch we could talk about in Pablo's. The one Pulverize, the Down and Dirty, the Heart of Final, and the Hold the Line maybe. And I think the E strikes we can kind of chalk up to like you can run E strike or Zealous. I think they're both like similar enough in this list. That
Yeah.
it's like it's the same. It's the same as before. It's like the more aggressive Guardians were running both to deal with like Droma and to just be a little bit more aggressive into dash and stuff like that. But you could really just run one or the other. I actually liked E strikes over Zealous just because of the flexibility. Um, Being able to do things like if I don't have a blue, I can still E strike for 7 off 2 reds, like E strike
Yeah, you can
to
fix like
whatever.
all red hands
Yep.
to a certain degree.
So
It
it's
doesn't need to
it's
be a certain attack value. Yeah. Yeah.
exactly. So it's not. We'll chalk that up to like you could run either. To be honest here, this
Yeah.
deck is running the one pulverize though. Do you like the one pulverize?
I do like the one pulverize. However,
Caveat.
I like it because I specifically want to win the mirror. I feel like if I lost a mirror, I would be more disappointed than if I didn't make top 8.
Like any other matchup, or just like lose you
Yeah.
lose your winning into Icelander. Like I don't care. I'd be Bravo
Like
the round
it
before.
happens, but like if it's like round 3 and I'm like I lost to a Bravo and I'm just like it would just ruin my mental. So
It just shouldn't have happened.
it's just the pride as a Bravo player. I think
That's
in
fair.
general Bravo players tend to be the players who have played him for a long time.
Oh yeah,
Um,
one of the oldest heroes.
So
So I don't
yeah,
know.
exactly.
I do
There's a
agree.
lot of
Like
pride there.
the Bravo is coming up. Like there will be
Yeah,
Bravos, especially at like US Nats. A lot of Bravo players in the US. Like there's a lot of regions that just have a disproportionately large amount of Guardian players. And
yeah,
now that like Bravo is here, I don't think he's going anywhere in the next month. So
mhm,
this will show up. I think adding a pulverize for the mirror is like it's super good. I think it's like a very
yeah,
good card to add literally right now. I don't know like next meta or whatever, but I think right
mhm,
now it does work into Dromai, it does work into Dash, stuff like that. Like
yep,
it does work. It hits for 14.
yeah.
Like you know, it's
I
quite
think also the matchups like Dromai and Dash, you struggle to get a clean 60 when you're running things like Staunch, Fate, Sigil,
yep
Sync. So
yep
having that one Pulverize is usually like your 60th card that
yeah
stays aggressive. It's a popper. For Dash, if you dominate it and are like at 10, you sometimes just push through,
yep
even when they have like, 4 items out, etc.
yep.
Um, and in the mirror, great card still. Yeah.
I agree.
So I like the one. I used to run two back in the
When
ProQuest of this year,
like
but
Oldhams and
there's
stuff.
no, yeah, when Oldhams were a bigger part of the meta. But yeah, I would say one is probably the most you'll ever see nowadays.
Yep, I would agree. Down and dirty. So two cost. See, well, I mean, you know what this card does from outsiders. It's
Yes,
been
yeah,
around a little bit. I
yeah.
don't have to explain it. Single down and dirty. I cannot for the life of me figure out why you would run this card in Bravo. Maybe you can enlighten me.
I guess is either it's for Dromai or Lexi. Dromai would be
Okay.
because you're scared of Lost in Thought. So having your popper in Arsenal prevents you from getting blown out on a turn where they like a Chromai Mirror guy Lost in Thought, and they have just like a board of dragons. So that's one thought
Okay.
there. The
Okay.
second thought is for Lexi. You don't want to get Codex or Frailtied, and instead of getting a CNC back, you just want to block an arrow for 5 with like down and dirty from Arsenal, card from hand.
Sure.
Will cover up
Yep.
basically any arrow. So
That's
those are
fair.
my only thoughts. Um, it could all be that he figured out his sideboard for his matchups, and he's like, I have one more slot for like Lexi or for Jomai, and then he's like, okay, let's just throw this in there, see how it does. Um, I'm not really huge on one ofs. I'm much more of a three of, two of, well, except pulverized. You
Yep.
gotta have that one.
No, that's
But
true.
yeah, but yeah. So those are the use cases I could see. But yeah, I I wouldn't. Like, I don't mind the inclusion, but I feel like there's it's not ideal. I would say.
Yeah, I kind of agree with your last point. I think it might have just been an extra slot, to be honest, and they're just like Sebastian's like, you know what? No one's gonna expect the block from the Arsenal. I mean, it's
Yeah.
another card you can add for like a dominated attack, I guess. Like you can, you know, can block with this card from Arsenal, a card from hand, and then like you're blocking for more. Yeah, it can give you a little bit more flexibility, I guess. And you do have Crown to get this card out if you need to once, but I don't know. I kind of agree with you. I think those scenarios are a little bit more niche, like the first and second. Like I see them, but I don't. I think it's too tight to deal with like niche hero scenarios rather than just the hero itself.
Yeah.
Um, hard if so to hold the line. That's probably the last one we'll talk about for this list. So now that you know what it does,
Now that I know what it does, um, I think it's actually quite interesting because it's a D react that covers for 2, which
yes,
means that
it's
you
on
can
par
play
with
around
Sync.
rain. Yes, you can play around rain razors, for example.
Yeah.
You can play around things like breaking scales
Yep.
or Azuri even. A lot of times with those, like if they just play a naked Bolton shot and you know they're gonna rain razors like you or something along those lines, you don't want to necessarily overblock, but at the same time you don't want to give them whatever effect they're looking for either. So hold the line could be nice. Versus Katsu, it would only be good if he played Art of War, which I guess he did.
Which they do.
Maybe.
Yeah, I think this was literally on Art of War. Like I think this was on an
Yeah.
Art of War turn to like get back into the game, and they just like he just stuffed him with hold the line or something at
Yeah.
some point.
So blue 0 for 5 is great there.
Yeah,
And for Lexi, when they play three of a kind, that's also obviously great there.
yeah,
Um, I guess if you're thinking about like Fi or Levia also, because Levia was also big in this tournament,
yep,
and Art of War definitely an inclusion in Levia. but I'm not too sure if I would include the card still because it's still very circumstantial, and it's like at its best, it's a card that blocks for 5, which is great. It's a blue, and then at its worst, it's just the blue that blocks for 2, which I guess isn't even that huge of a downside. But yeah, I don't know. I actually think that card's quite interesting.
Would you run it
The
over blue pummel?
uh, I would run a lot of things over blue pummel as
Okay,
well.
that's I just wanted to set I wanted to set the blue two block boundary here at blue pummel. So
Yeah,
that's what we're looking at right now. Um,
yeah,
I do think enough of the top decks run to like draw 2 or mores that it's also drawn 2 or more this turn, right? So it could be
mhm,
like 2 draw 1 effect. Like this could hit things like Briar, technically like Gorganian tomes and stuff like that. There are different like
yeah,
scenarios where other decks can go. Obviously, 3 of a kind Art of War are the biggest ones, and I think this being a thing where if you're expecting a bunch of Lexis, it's probably the main use case. Is probably Lexi, because our
yeah,
Lexi's running 3 of a kind and Art of War for that matter, and this being able to block 5 on that is quite good for that game plan, right? So I
yeah.
do see it again. One of would I have run 2 of them and not doubted dirty? Like I don't really know. It might have just been like a don't know what to decide kind of thing. But
Mhm.
let's move on to the last one we're gonna look at, and this is Mr. Pintor, the Pintor class submarine himself. So he's running 2 null rune.
Do no
So
room.
I think his answer was essentially that it's just more efficient, essentially, as far as like the curve
Yes.
goes. I think he explained it as an
Mhm.
efficiency thing. Whereas
Yes.
you're not really going to be looking to pitch an entire blue to to block whatever. So that's kind of his reasoning for the double null rune, and then he's running, the standard suite of equipment outside of that.
Yeah.
Um the list itself, back on Zealous, very probably the most stock standard Bravo list I've seen probably in my life. Like
Yeah.
it kind of
It's just like
it,
all
it,
3 ofs and then
yeah,
2 pummels.
like maybe boring is just better here, but it just kind of
Yeah.
goes to show that like tech cards are all fine and good, but you just got to play the deck well and just like take it from there, right? Like you don't
Yeah.
necessarily need all these fancy cards. It is interesting. We'll talk a little bit about maybe the final spirit and the staunches. We didn't talk about them yet. But the three fates, double pummel, sigils, sinks, all used pretty well. So I think the triple red staunch. What do you think about red staunch here in the meta?
So I think at the time it was a good answer for Lexi. Um, Covering up 7 is actually a pretty nice breakpoint.
Yeah,
Even for things like Briar, they'll come in for 7 with like Channel Mount Heroic, things like that. And especially against Briar, you have the one floating still to pay for any Rouge Hand or Rosetta
like
Swing, things
arcane.
like that.
Yeah,
Yeah. So I do like Staunch. I think it's a very good, efficient block. However, now that I think more, my cat is being very vocal. Anyways, now that I think that decks are preparing more for the fatigue strat, I don't necessarily like Staunch that much. I think it's a very heavy investment to include in your deck because I don't know. It just creates. I think. How do I say this? When your opponent is preparing to play against fatigue, they'll have more off turns to set up. And the issue I have now is that you kind of need to strike a balance between having enough defensive cards to threaten fatigue versus not having too many defensive cards where you can actually threaten them when they take an off turn.
sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
you
So
don't want to be breaking with all your defensive tools when you like just got tempo and you need to like push it.
yeah, because Lexi, for example, can definitely set up better 6 card hands and play slower, and you don't want to draw into Staunch Fate and do nothing but swing hammer when you have a 3 card hand, for example. Same goes for every deck. Um, like Briar can play it slower, wait for their Channel Mount Heroics. Katsu can wait for like a perfect Surging, Whelming Bonds line turn, things like that. So I am not too huge on Staunch, but I wouldn't hate it either. I think also the fact that I personally would want to run 3 Null Rune and Tunic for Icelander now. I don't think the deck really has space for staunches, so that's how I feel.
That's fair. I would I would definitely echo the statement on like the prep stuff. Like I think staunch was good for this event. when
Mhm.
nobody was really expecting Bravo to come out in any sort of real way. I don't think people were really
Yeah,
expecting it. Um, so
and you
that,
were also probably expecting a lot of Leviathan. Also,
yep,
Staunch also probably a great card for that matchup.
yep, no, Staunch definitely good, very efficient.
Mhm.
Good in the mirror. There's other good good uses, good into Dory, but I think Lexi probably being the main idea, as far as like the prior strategy being buckling, blow, buckle, trying to hit New Horizon kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I think that was
Mhm.
the strat before it. But that matchup was
Yeah.
that matchup was hard with that arm piece that shall not be named. But I think
Mhm.
that was pretty much it as far as the list. Again, very very boring kind of stock standard list. But oh,
Yeah.
I guess the blue Finals Fighting Spirit we didn't talk about yet.
The finals fighting spirit is like the other big thing. That slot was basically imposing in most people's list before,
Yeah,
and the thing is, like, people have come around, not recently, but like people have come around to the fact that most of the time going second is better, unless it's like a very mid range or slow matchup. And
yeah,
because of that, imposing just isn't that great. It's a non-attack, which means it's like okay into Azuri and Bolton when you need a block. But past the first turn of the game, the card is like basically dead. Like there are niche situations where you draw 4 blues, you play imposing, you get another blue, you swing Anethos for 6, and next hand you have a 5 card hand, which is like okay, but for the most part, the card is dead outside of turn 0 or turn 1 or something.
yeah,
So Findell's being able to hopefully cover something while also gaining a life is pretty good. However, it also is under the assumption that you are lower life, which even when you're fatiguing isn't always the case. Sometimes your opponents are playing it a bit slower, and because of that, you're like hammering every turn and they're just eating it every turn. And then you're at like 30 and they're at like 20, but they've set up like this huge hand. And your finals are kind of dead there also. So honestly, at this point, I you could run either. Like I've tried both, and there have been situations where I would have preferred one or the other. I don't know if I can definitively say like, oh yeah, finals fighting spirit is like the move. You got to run it. Imposing is Garbo. Never touch that card.
yeah. No, I definitely agree. For the life point, I think in the semis he literally was never lower life when he had this card. So he was just either pitching it or like
Yeah,
blocking and not gaining life. So it was just a 2 block. But I definitely understand the breakpoint math where it's just like, well, you could block with 2 3 blocks on a 5 power arrow, or you can block with this 3 block and 2 block and gain a life if you're lower life, right? So it's just infinitely better value because you
yeah,
actually get to absorb the extra point. If you do that 3 times, that's another sigil in your deck, right? So I definitely understand it.
yeah,
It is also like an attack action that you can use for
yeah.
technically you can use for rouse
Arouse.
and stuff like that. Yeah, not zealous unfortunately, but you can use it for rouse. So it's it's got things there. It's
Yeah,
3 costs. Your Titan's Fist comes in for 4. It's there are
yeah,
things and stuff, but like I think the main thing is that I think if you're fatiguing well, there's a pretty good possibility that you're never going to be lower life until like the very last turn or two, where they just like trying to
yeah.
break out with a combo or something like that. Which was definitely the case in semis against Lexi, where he was just kind of like doing a good job, other than like the very last one or two turns where he just kind of tried to blow out with Rain Razors. But I definitely don't know if this card I, I probably would still run it over imposing because I do agree that imposing bit of a dead card other than turn. Like, you want to be going second regardless, so it's just like, well, I don't know.
Yeah.
Even if they pass, you don't really want to be going set. Like if you go second, you pick it, and you really don't want imposing in your hand because it just
Yeah.
does nothing other than pitch, right? So just one more
Mhm.
card that doesn't do anything. I feel like that was it for as far as Pablo's list goes. So we could maybe talk a little bit about the future state, kind of going into the Nats meta. I'll just say the Nats meta because I think that's like
Yeah.
the main piece before Bright Lights comes out. So kind of Nats meta
Mhm.
and maybe some changes, and then finish it up with a couple matchup notes. See like how to, because I think many people have different ideas on like different ways they can play the matchup depending on their builds. People kind of think there's maybe like a stock standard, you just play Bravo into whatever, and like this is how you play Bravo, but he doesn't have to
Mhm.
play super mid range every single time.
Yeah.
But depending on the matchup. So as far as the national season goes, which starts next week, I believe. So the I think the main decks that, as you earlier mentioned, that people are worried about are probably going to be Lexi, Icelander, Dromai. Katsu's up there, Dash probably creeping up there too, especially with
Yeah.
Icelander coming aboard. Dash pretty good response to that, and that's kind of like the big ones I think people are going to be practicing for. So with that in mind, what do you think would be the most obvious kind of either inclusions or like changes you would make to that strategy given what you know about the lists and the the recent performances?
Yeah, so I think the Dromai matchup, the deck largely is unchanged because if you still have Zealous and if you still have, some choke slams and like of some pummels, then you can basically side out all of your defensive cards and still
Yeah,
run like a clean 60 and just, either beat them up or pop some dragons. The matchup does, they did gain a few points because of Lost in Thought. If they're playing, Big Dragon. But I think in general, it's still pretty favored for Bravo. For Icelander, it's really up to you how you want to play the matchup. You can go AB1 and just take the L. You can go AB2 like Pablo and try to just play efficiently and hope they break a bit. Or you can play like AB3 plus Tunic and try to slow down the game. Um, brushed over it, but basically the idea between AB2 is that like if they play Aether Ice Vein, AB2 covers that pretty well with two blues. Basically, you pitch to block two, and then you pitch another blue to pay for an additional two, and if they Waning Moon, that blocks another two.
yeah,
If it doesn't look like they're playing on Waning Moon, then you would just AB1, pay two, and keep a three card hand.
sure.
Or, but I think in general, how I like to approach the matchup is to slow it down. I think that it's pretty difficult for Bullander to get Frost Hexes out when they have so many reds like Scar, Fighting Spirit, Wounded
Sure.
Bull / Raging Onslaught, Sinks, Fates, whatever they're running. So trying your best to not give them value on their attack actions, and then forcing them to play out their Frost Hexes, and hopefully during that time you're able to eke enough damage through that they're not able to Ice Eternal combo you. Uh, but I really haven't played the matchup since pre-Outsiders during ProQuest, so that was when they still had like Amulet of Ice and stuff. So I don't really
Yeah,
know how much the matchup has changed.
sure.
I would say probably a good amount, but uh, I would say it's still Icelander favored. But I think Bravo can still get there. But at the same time, I also think Bravo has a lot more heavy lifting to do in that matchup,
Yeah, because
which is
Icelander
weird to
can
say
just
because Icelander is a very complicated deck in general.
yeah.
Um, but I don't know what it is when I play that matchup. I'm like my brain's just going through it. So
No, that makes
and then
sense.
in terms of Lexi matchup, it's probably the one that I would have the hardest time predicting because Lexi can adapt in so many ways. They can run Snap to try to go over the top. They can run Quiver of Rustling Leaves to go over the top. They can run Abyssal Depths to try to not get fatigued. They can run Perch and Hornets so they can block, 7 with Tunic and a card on your Starstruck. Or they can block basically anything with their armor except for Crippling. That's the only thing they can't cover.
Yeah,
But even then, you play Crippling and then they play Three of a Kind, and it's like nothing happened anyways. But I would say Lexi is probably still the toughest matchup, and you can approach it either way you want. You can, board 66 cards, all D reacts and stuff, and hope that they don't get there. Or you can, run a clean 60 and try to beat them up, and they board up cards, or they basically lower the consistency of their deck in order to hedge against fatigue. So it's really a toss up in how the matchup goes because it really depends what both players pick, and you can't really assume one player's going to pick one way or the other
flesh and
because
blood.
the decks these days, like even even like Pablo's deck, you can still side in a way if you wanted to play like a clean 60 and play for tempo, you could.
Yeah,
Um, and
it's
the
true.
same goes for Lexi. But I think in general they'll hedge in some form. I think in the end, Bravos will probably hedge in some form also, where it's like you can try to fatigue if you feel like their deck's not ready for it, or you can, just go unga bunga if you see them flip over Snap plus Quiver of Rustling Leaves.
Yeah, no, that's definitely it's definitely a little bit interesting. A lot of the decks now have that kind of option where it's like I know that if I was Lexi and I saw Dory, I'd just be shitting myself, be like, holy shit, are they trying to fatigue me or are they going to run at me? Because those are two very different sideboard options. When you like side in
Yeah,
stuff like Remembrance and they're running at you, you're just doomed. Or they just flip
yeah,
over the axe and you're like, oh shit, it's
yeah,
this one. So I definitely I definitely think a lot of those decks now have like multi, and that's good for the game, right? Like you want to
Mhm.
have multiple kind of versions of the deck, which increases
But
the
you kind of have
pathways
to
to
adapt to
success.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, it
Mhm.
just makes it a lot more like complicated, which for classic construction, I guess should have a decent level of complications to it, I guess.
Yeah.
But that's what did I mention? I guess Katsu's interesting actually because I think Katsuists have gotten quite a bit of power recently with outsiders.
Yeah.
But historically, the matchup has been real strange. I feel like it was like Bravo favored, then Katsu favored, then Bravo favored, but then like I think Katsu probably has a bit of an edge. Like even when we saw that game, Bravo can roll hot, obviously, but I think Katsu able to like
Yeah.
just Kadachi you down eventually with the right build. It's still pretty hard for Bravo to like get through. Is what I've kind of seen in games I've seen or played. But I don't know how you feel about it.
I think the Katsu matchup is really weird. Because you can look at it like, oh, Katsu ability, they're basically fatiguing themselves. So
Sure.
you can look at the matchup and go, oh, I can fatigue them. But if the Katsu knows that and they purposefully avoid triggering their Katsu ability and they just try to eke out every point of damage they can from their deck, they will get there. Kadachis are like really efficient against fatigue because you don't have like Rampart Crown. And because of that, it's like not super easy to fatigue Katsu. And also, Katsu in general doesn't have good armor. Like they have basically two armor. They have breaking skills and they have breeze rider boots. And they
Yep.
have tunic, but the game generally does go a good amount of time, so they don't want to give
Sure.
that too early. They also don't want to give mass too early, otherwise their Kodachis are just vanillas.
Yep.
So their armor is pretty light. So you can kind of just like try to tempo, disrupt, be aggressive. But depending on like how many defensive cards the Katsu has, how many sinks they have, how many flick flacks, or if they're crazy, they have reinforce also, which is kind of usually more of a phi tech.
Yeah.
Like if you're on Katsu, you definitely are running flick flack over reinforce most of the time.
Sure. Yeah.
Um, Basically, it just seems like the more defensive cards the Katsu has, the more they can slow down the matchup, and the more they're able to just eke out a value over the course of the game. And if you ever like whiff on a turn and they've been like waiting with like a surging and arsenal to just deal 30 damage to you, it's kind of impossible to come back from there. So
Yeah. I think
it really depends how much space these Katsu decks have, whether or not they can commit. I would say like probably 60 reacts is enough to
yeah,
swing
like
it a bit in their favor.
sinks flicks that kind of thing.
Yeah, sinks and
Um,
flicks. Yeah.
I think the knowledge, the matchup knowledge is also extra important in this because
Hmm.
knowing how to block into Katsu is like a skill. Knowing how to block into Dori is a skill. Knowing how to block into very specific decks is kind of just like a bit of a poker match, right? So
Yeah.
Katsu is just one of those decks where if Bravo blocks poorly and uses armor and gets blown out, it's definitely a
Hmm.
lot more Katsu favored than it was before, right? Like committing armor and then misblocking, or
Yeah.
just like committing on a surging or something like that, or letting these things go through and the combo is off, and then Katsu is able to recognize that and just go off. Um,
Yeah.
definitely changes things, right? But I think the base matchup there's not. I think Starstruck like is quite good in the
Oh
matchup.
yeah.
Like I think
Starstruck's
Starstruck
very good.
like slaps. Like that card is so good, especially into
Yeah.
these kinds of go wide matchups, right? So I think Bravo has the tools. It really just depends on kind of if Katsu knows how to play the matchup and respects it. I think Katsu edges it out a little bit, like probably slightly higher than 50-50 in my opinion.
Yeah.
But I think Bravo has choke slam that hurts Katsu. Art of War turns. I mean, hold the line's
Yeah.
pretty funny, but if you're running hold the
Yeah.
line, you're running hold the line. But I think Bravo can definitely get there. But
You let them trigger mask and snatch, and you're like, ha, I have hold the line match. But yeah.
oh yeah, it's literally mass. Yeah, the thing is, like mask and literally ancestral, and it's just like, oh, my
Oh
hold
yeah,
the line
true.
is
Yeah.
on. Yeah, I
Yeah.
can hold the line now. You don't even need art of
Yeah.
war into that, which is pretty funny. Makes it actually like a pretty good tech if you're expecting a lot of Katsus, which is kind of funny to think about. But
Yeah.
um, that's kind of fair. So couple points before we kind of eke out the last couple matchups and wrap up here. I do agree that if I'm expecting a lot of Icelanders, I do personally like Tunic 3-0. The reason is just like getting around that hex plan, like taking a lot less damage from those frostbites, especially if they're able
Yeah.
to get frost hex early. The Tunic will
Mhm.
save you a lot of hassle because you'll most likely than not a ton of their turns can create multiple frostbites on your turn, right? And
Yeah.
so that tunic insurance is just like massive because you're able to like essentially let like Ice Eternal resolve and pay into Tunic and break the like there's a bunch of those, and people knew about these before, but Tunic just gives
Yeah,
you a sink for it, whereas Oldhim also had Crown, whereas
yeah.
Bravo doesn't. So Bravo, like that one card I feel like does give you some points. Will it make you win the matchup? Probably not by itself, no, but I think it does give you enough points, and there's probably enough Icelanders that will show up to a lot of nats, that it's probably worth exploring for anyone looking at it. Because I definitely, I know you probably like it too. You already mentioned, but
Mhm.
really like Tunic quite a bit there. I think interesting seeing everyone go back to two red pummels. I think all the lists we saw had the two red pummels. I don't know about two versus three.
Yeah.
I could be convinced with two just because of how tight slots are, but then when I see like two pummels and then I just see like down and dirty, just like maybe I just do
So
three pummels. Or I like a pulverize or something. I really don't know whether like that extra slot from pummel is worth keeping it because I think pummel does like a lot of work in a lot of
I think
matchups.
yes, I think Pummel, especially for Icelander, Pummel is really good.
Yeah, Pummel's
Um,
great into like that is one of the key
yeah,
win cons into Icelander.
yeah. It's like I don't think you necessarily need three to Dromai.
Oh yeah,
Because
that's
if
fair.
you're forced into popping a lot, it kind of becomes
Bit of a
a
liability.
liability. Yeah. But I think just the fact that in general Bravos are like hedging more toward this fatigue plan, you don't need all three. Whereas like
Yeah,
in the past, if you wanted to play like a very tempo disruptive, anti stubby fi deck, you want three pummels for sure. You'd want three blue pummels for sure. Why not, right? But now it's kind of just like, especially blue pummel, the rate's just so bad. And
yeah.
then if you arsenal it, you're just like, wow, I really need to play this card, but there's no situation where this is good.
Crown of Seeds quick.
But
Oh wait.
yeah, basically, red pummel is definitely better, but it's definitely a liability. And I think in general, a lot of people have kind of come around to the idea of like, if you like a card but you don't want to see two of it in a hand ever, then you just cut it to two. Like if you see two cripplings in a hand, worst case you just block with it. You see two red pummels in a hand, you're just like, wow, this sucks.
I think that's a very real consideration, just getting two of it.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, no, I could totally see it. I just don't know whether I think it really just depends on the meta and what you're trying to do. Like if a lot of these lists, if their main strat into like Alexi is to fatigue him, yeah, you probably take the two because it depends on like how many of those matchups you'll see. If like you're worried about a lot of Lexi Dromai, Pummel probably, unless you're going like Unga Bunga, probably not super important because you don't need to push
yeah,
through any on hits or anything like that. And a lot of the times, if they're just shipping their hand anyways to block something like an undominated crippling, the pummel doesn't do anything. So it's
Mhm.
just like uh, adding another inconsistency. So I do agree with that. I like the three sigils, three sinks. Probably run three fates. I don't know if I would cut down to two fates. I think the third fates, like if that's your plan, you should just
Yeah,
take the three fates because like opt is good. Opt it's not as good as sync, but opt is
yeah.
still good. Like
Helps you get to your second cycle also
yeah,
if
exactly.
you're
That's
like a
another
mid
one.
range matchup. Yeah,
Yep, that's true. I will say the three staunch. I do agree with you. I I think this will depend on the player, but I personally, if I was bringing Bravo to something like this, and then I determined that I'm probably incorrect in saying that I'm going to give the benefit of the doubt. A lot of Lexi players probably are prepping for like a fatigue strat into a lot of these decks,
yeah,
just because I don't know if you saw the whole calling, but we saw Axe Story fatigue Alexi, then we saw fatigue Bolton beat Alexi, and then
yeah,
we've literally seen Lexi being fatigued like 4 different times during the 2 days, and I think everyone is kind of getting it through their head that without Bullseye you've lost 6-7 plus damage on your big like go out turn, and you've lowered
yeah.
your consistency. Other decks have like more weapons like to kind of swing at you. Decks have got upgrades. Um so I don't think I would put my eggs into the staunch basket per se. I don't know what I would change to it. I might want to just try Unga Bunga strat and try to get some unsuspecting players.
Yeah.
Because again, if they're boarding in like for Lexi, if they're boarding in like Quiver of Abyssal or and Perch, they're not gonna have nearly as much like go big potential. I need to throw attacks at them. Just keep taking their cards, right? Just keep taking their cards and kind of see what happens there. So that's probably the other thing I'd mention. Um, I like Warmonger as unmovable. All the blues. I probably still run Fighting Spirit. I don't think I'd go back. Anything else that like we didn't mention a card that we saw on like none of the lists that we would kind of consider? know actually. I think between all three of the lists, it covered like quite a bit.
Mm,
I really don't like the Heart of Findel. I don't like Heart right now.
oh,
I don't like because we saw that in Sebastian's list, I think, with the hold the
yeah.
line and that. I really don't like. If I didn't like Grandeur, I don't like Heart. I think it's
Yeah, I
I
think it,
think you're it kind of feels like you're holding on to old him. It kind of feels like you can't let go of old
yeah.
him at that point when you're still running a Heart in Bravo. I don't think Heart's good in Bravo at all, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Even on
If you're
fatigue.
not running if you're not running staunch, there's no reason to run it really. If you're
Yeah,
like if you want to go really heavy and go like Rampart, Tunic, and just play Oldhim, then sure, go for it. But it's meh.
that doesn't work. That deck was just Crown of Seeds. Like that literally was just Crown of Seeds, right?
Yeah,
So
it's Crown of Seeds.
it's
Not
Crown of
being
Seeds
able to
dump deck.
arsenal any card in your deck really hurts that kind of
Yeah,
playstyle for Bravo. Like
yeah. You
you'll
have
have like a Showtime in hand, you'd be like, okay, pass.
yeah, you literally pass. It's just like, oh, I don't have Crown of Prominence. I guess I lose, right?
Or I guess
Um,
you could hammer, but yeah.
yeah, I guess you can hammer. One other thing I really like I didn't mention with the tunic is you could CNC pummel off the tunic. You could be like Oldhim, bad CNC pummel. I
So
like it's a
here's
thing.
the thing. Sidebar. I
Okay.
think CNC Pommel is the most overrated thing that people talk about
Ah,
in Guardian.
that's the
It's
deck.
like
It's not a Guardian deck. It's a CNC pummel deck.
it's a C-
That's what you really boil it
like
down to.
so here's the thing. I have experimented playing Tunic over
Just
Tectonic
it's just like
when I'm
regular
playing
matchups.
yeah, against like Hatsu, against like Lexi.
Yep.
Because what it does is that you can throw your cripplings or your starstrucks for just 2 blues, and you
Yep.
don't need to dominate it because dominate is honestly kind of it's overrated in a lot of spots because
Yep.
if you get blocked by a D react, you kind of lose a lot of
Yeah.
value in that turn cycle. So just
Sure.
throwing those cards undominated with the tunic is pretty valuable because you're if they have 2 blocks, then it's like their turn is really messed up. Or if they really need to keep all of their cards, they'll just give you all their armor anyways, and you just were able to save 3 life that way by not needing to dominate it. But I think that people just overvalue the whole CNC pummel thing too much. Like even in the matchups where I'm running Tunic and I was trying out that strategy, I was like, sure, I'll board in pummel, why not? And it's like it rarely comes up. Like sure, when you get it and you blow them out, it feels great, but it's also like
Feels great, Alan.
it feels
Great.
amazing.
Like
But
GR8 great.
it's just you're just unless for some reason you just have all the tempo in the game and you're just like starstruck, and you draw into CNC pummel with Tunic up, then it's like you were kind of already winning that game anyways. A lot of the times I feel like you're saving a CNC or you're saving a pummel in your arsenal, you're giving up something by not blocking something usually. And by waiting for the other combo piece for too long, you're also kind of just not getting like good value out of your hands. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. I just think in general that pummel is. I feel like all the Nart Oliver loves pummel so much because he doesn't play it.
Seems reasonable. Um, yeah, that is true. It's just like one more thing. Like you have it, so you can do it. Um, it doesn't usually work. Like Icelander literally just gives you a frostbite and like your entire shit. You just have to give him a blue anyways, which is kind of funny. But it's kind of like just like an extra option if they don't have it.
Yeah.
I think I don't think there's any other like
Trying to
super.
think if there's any other cards I've tried recently. I mean, if you want to go way back, there's like Tomo Findall Mage Master boots, but
Oh, stop.
that tech is long
Just
gone.
leave me with my Iron Rot Fable
Yeah,
and just I don't know. Every time I play like Mage Master's Tome, I'm like, I either don't get Tome until I'm dead, or I'm just like I get Tome super early. I try to set it up and I get hit for a bajillion. I'm like, okay, well, I got a crown or something. I'm
yeah.
gonna Tome and gain 2 life, and then
But
hammer.
you play Tom, you draw 2 cards, and the best you can do is like disable blue disable. It's
I
great. Card is great.
I think it I think it had a lot of merit in Oldhim just to get to stack faster and for like you could stack it with pulverize and do some crazy shit off like Mage Master's Tome stack. It was a thing you could do
Mhm.
it, and that's when like second third cycle mattered. Oldham's not here anymore, so you're not going to see a lot of those matchups anymore necessarily. So I think it's a bit of a
Yeah.
waste because you need 2 cards to run it, and if you're only running 1 tome, there's a good chance you just will never see it until it's too late.
Mhm.
So I'd probably stick with. I mean, there's something to be said about running like Ironhide stuff into specific matchups, like into maybe like the Rune Blades, pitch, and you could do other things and
Yeah.
a little bit sus, but I've seen it. I've seen Ironhide in like more defensive
Yeah.
builds. You pitch
Mhm.
for like staunch Ironhide, block for 9. It's not bad.
It's not bad. Not bad.
But I don't think it's worth the slot, and I don't think I've run it in every matchup. So for that reason, probably not going to be included. But yeah, I
Yeah.
can't really think of anything else that's like super important here. Are there any other matchups that we kind of didn't mention that are? So I know Kadachi Fi is running around now. That's a thing I've seen. I know you have
Yeah,
a soft spot
Kadachi
for Kadachi Fi.
Kadachi Fi definitely is I would say favored into Bravo.
Yeah.
It's kind of similar. Like there's just a lot of you can't really fatigue them because of they do get a lot of Phoenix Flame value, a lot of Shuko value, and their fridge is bigger than Katsu's.
Yep.
So difficult to fatigue, and over time they generally do outvalue you unless you run hot.
Yep.
So I would say Kadachi Fi is definitely a bit favored there, but Kadachi Fi loses to a bunch of other things. I would say the other major matchup, well, Briar we could talk about, but people have known for a while that Briar has kind of been a bad matchup for Bravo.
Yeah, it's still a
They,
bad matchup for Bravo.
especially now that they have Carapace and like their fridge is bigger. I'm like, okay.
They have
That's cool.
another good Earth card that's actually usable that they they could
Yeah.
have in their deck.
And then I would say the only other matchup I would really want to talk about is Dash.
Yeah.
So hot tip for all the Dash players. I think Dash in general, Pistol Dash is a good matchup for Bravo only because people aren't really playing it right. Um, either you play
Elaborate.
extremely either if you're Dash and you want to beat Bravo, in my opinion, either A, you play really defensively and you have like 12D reacts or something, and Bravo literally just can't get through and you have your item inevitability, or you actually need to play really aggressively. Like if you only have like 3 unmovables and 3 sinks and you're trying to get all your pistol stuff out, honestly, you probably still lose that matchup. I've had games where the dash player goes turn 1 item, turn 2 item. I play something, they block with armor, get another item. The life is still 40-40, and I still get there in the end. I think the issue is that dash in general players usually try to get too many items. I think 3 items is the sweet spot of where you need to be. But it's not even like you need those 3 items. You need those 3 items to sort of say, you can't fatigue me, so I'm going to boost as much as I want, and you can't outrace me if I'm boosting. That's how I see it. But most dashes I play against, it feels like, oh, I'll just block, set up my items, and then I win the game. And that's usually not how it works out.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think the double induction purifier, is that what you're talking about?
Either way, as long as it's 3 items, because it's your most efficient way of using 2 blues. Because in
Yeah,
general, you're going to need to block with some cards also,
yeah,
because the Bravo
yeah. I do
for the most part.
feel.
But yeah.
Yeah, I do feel that's also an issue. Is like they have too many items and they have to block, and they only have 1 blue and they can't even use all their items. So it's just like, okay, well,
Yeah, exactly. Because I've had so many games where the dash gets out the 4th or 5th item, but it gets to the point where we're trading blows and they only keep 2 cards in hand, and they're only really able to use like 2 or 3 items a turn, and those other
yeah,
ones are just sitting there. I don't really know how the math works out because I'm not a dash player. Where if like you took an off turn to just set up all your items, if that's any better, but I don't know. I just think in general, dash players tend to overvalue items and blocking too much. Like
sure,
just boost. Honestly, like if you have cards in hand, just boost away. And like even if you boost 1 item, like you still have backups. It's not easy to fatigue dash,
yeah.
even if you boost an item. Like unless you boost like 2 inductions and 2 purifiers, then it's like okay, that's kind of an issue. But
Yeah, don't boost until like you have at least an item or 2 out, and just like you have something, right? But I guess if they run a bunch of D reacts too, could be ending up like boosting a bunch of D reacts. Probably not super ideal. I think it really depends on the deck composition. They're kind of all over the place now, dealing with other decks. I also don't think I don't think Dash's matchup into I think Dash and matchup into Dromai is shit. Like I think it's bad. I think it's quite bad. Doesn't matter what your plan is. I have not seen a reliable, like a good Dromai lose a reliable amount of times into a dash, no matter what the build is. I don't think your Lexi matchup's good. Like I don't like I'm not unless you're just like sitting there with a million defense, like you're turtling a monster. I don't even know if you're. I guess if they're like if Lexi kind of plays this anti-fatigue thing,
Well, you got 9 T-bones, you got 3 Meganetics. You might get there.
you just run at him. Yeah, I'm not saying Dash can't win. I
Yes,
just
yes.
I don't think the matchup's great for Dash. If
Yeah,
Lexi
yeah.
goes off early, I think Dash is kind of just sitting there and be like, well, now I'm just praying to keep enough cards to like do things, right? Um,
Yeah.
so I do
I
kind of
think the
agree. Well,
Icelander matchup can be okay, but yeah, for Dash.
I think Dash is definitely like. I think Dash is one of the reasons I would bring Dash is Icelander. That would be like a matchup that I would be looking forward to seeing. We're talking about Bravo here. I'm not talking about any of that crap here. I do, I do kind of agree with most of those matchup notes there. I don't think there's anything else matchup wise. I think the only thing I'll mention is the Levia matchup, which is an interesting matchup because I think Levia still will be a decent enough representation that you will see it, especially in the calling, especially in like open tournaments. I think you'll see it like a fair number of Levias. I don't know how much about
Yeah.
like bringing it to Nats, but I think you will see
Mhm.
it in open tournaments. I think Bravo's matchup with Levia is really strange in that it really is. I feel like it's more on the. I agree. It's more on the Levia to win and Bravo just to like hit with a bunch of disruption because Levia trying to like go mid-rangey block with cards, swing for like 7 or 8, and then just try to like go off once you
Yeah.
have like a certain amount of blood debt. It's just like okay, but then they also have a shit ton of armor, so
Yeah.
it's a little bit interesting as Bravo how to like get through that because it's if Levia is playing super well and knows how to play the end game, it's not great for Bravo. I feel like I don't
Okay.
think
Well,
it's that, and then Starstruck does nothing. That's also
yeah.
something that is a little bit awkward.
I think that in theory, Levia is a problem for Bravo because one, you have a really good fridge, and
Yeah.
two, you generally present above rate things, and that's the formula for success against Bravo. You have a fridge and you present
Don't
above
don't
rate.
do on don't do above rate, on rate only.
Yeah. But the thing with Levia is obviously inconsistency. There are definitely times where she can't utilize 4 card hands great without relying on scab skins.
True.
And so
True.
because of that, there's inconsistency. I think in general, the game plan for Bravo isn't to like try to blow them out, dominate, is to kind of mid-rangey trade back and forth. Because you do need to force them to transform one way or another. If you're
Yeah.
not pressuring them enough to transform, you basically are just losing the game. If they transform into Blasphemous, you just fatigue from there because they only really have like so much they can push out in one turn because their
Yep.
deck's gone in like 2 turns.
Sure.
And I think Leviah Redeemed is honestly scarier for Bravo, um, because it just means she has all this above rate cards in her deck that have no drawback. But the issue is getting enough blood debt in her banish is pretty tough, or should be tough if you're pressuring her enough. Like I'm not
Yep.
saying you just eat everything to throw dominated cripplings every turn, but just
Yeah.
like you hammer here, you throw a 2 card choke slam here, etc. Just kind of just feel it out, I guess. Maybe
Yeah.
throw in a pulverizer or something.
Yeah. I think
Um,
Pulverize does a lot of work there. I do think like the times I see Bravo winning are literally consumed, Bravo fatigues, and Bravo wins. And I think that might be
yeah,
more so Levia not knowing how to play the end game as well, because it's still a newer kind of hero. And maybe there
yeah.
could be like by the time Nats rolls around, that kind of end game gets a little bit cleaner.
Hmm.
But again, as you mentioned, the inconsistency, seeing like Levia roll ones and like do
Yeah, like
really
at Birmingham,
awkward
the double
things.
ones and then
The
lost the
double
game. That was
ones,
crazy.
he had it in the bag too. It
He
was
had
supposed
it,
to be
and
a
that was
done. It was
tragic.
against Bravo too. It was literally,
Yeah, yeah.
I
He was
guess
on
Yorgo was on
humble. He was on
Bravo.
the humble. He was
It
on the
was on.
humble pummel.
Honestly, Humble's not even that bad of a card. I think Humble has
Uh,
like
it blocks two.
it's
It
not even
blocks
that bad.
two.
Look,
It
hear
blocks
me out, hear me
two.
out. You just kill Leviathan with that
It's the
card.
same thing as CNC pummel. It's overrated.
But the effect is actually like pretty funny. Like you can hit that, like you can make Lexi block. You can make Levia block because I don't Levia doesn't want to take that, right? And if Levia has like a really good Blood
Yeah.
Rush hand, you could be doing some stuff there. There are definitely like hero abilities that stopping them's pretty valuable. Like not letting Katsu go off could be decent. Like I think Humble's better in Azuri, to be honest. I think Humble's better when you can't see it. I agree,
Yeah.
but I don't think it's like okay, down and dirty or Humble. That's kind of like what I'm looking at, right? Same stats. I'd probably rather put Humble in, to be honest. I think it's got like better potential. I'd rather pummel it if I had it. Right, like if I have to pummel something, pummeling a Humble is not
Yeah,
even that bad. Like
it's
the
not.
I think the on hit against like you don't bring it into every matchup, but into a matchup where the hero ability is like reasonable, like Lexi has a face down card in Arsenal. If you humble them and you hit them, that's a not attack. You're doing
Yeah.
well in life. It's not their warmongers, right? And they don't even know it
Mhm.
yet. So and they can't plan around it, and they're like not on trench or anything. It's not bad. It can have like some pretty good use effects. So
Yeah, I think Humble is interesting. I think in general the 2 cost sixes are interesting for Bravo
yeah,
because either A, you can build your deck more around Tunic and Pummel because
yep.
you just love CNC Pummel. It's your favorite feeling in the world. Or it can be
It's a
another way to generate
dopamine
a
dot deck.
it's your other way to efficiently generate a surge when you're on Titan Buckler. Because if
Sure.
you're making a surge when you're on Titan Buckler, it's like, what are you doing? You're swinging for 4 and making a surge? No, 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 no.
Yeah, that seems yeah, it seems bad. But swing like making a surge and coming with humble is like it's not bad. Forces
Yeah,
blocks a lot of
it's
decks.
basically Anathos. It's red. It blocks 2. But if you're
But
not
there's an
blocking with
on
it,
hit.
then
Yeah.
it's the same thing. Yeah,
And
there's
you
an
get the
on hit.
seismic. And you get the seismic. I think that's all. That's all the matchups that I wanted to bring up. Anyways, I think anything that we didn't bring up probably not. Might not
Yeah,
see
it's
as
definitely
much
more
of it.
niche.
Yeah.
I mean, Azuri is definitely a bit more prevalent than,
Yeah. I
but
think
I would
Azuri
say her
was.
stock's kind of fallen. I also think the
Yeah,
fact
because of
that
the
Bravo is
Lexius.
now
Yeah,
that you
lack of
run
Lexius.
more D-reacts, like
Yeah.
before I didn't run Fates and the matchup was like pretty close, but now that I run Fates, I'm like not really worried, to be honest.
No, it's just
Like
like
they just
Azuri.
can't really push enough damage.
Yeah, their on hits don't work if they don't hit. Like that's the key with
Exactly.
Azuri. It's top
Mm-hmm.
tier level brain right there. Like
Right.
you just block and you just stop on hits.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I agree. Like the extra D reacts definitely definitely stop that matchup quite well. Azuri really is like the Lexi Katsu hunter, and that's just like the being the trademark, especially Lexi. I think it was
Yeah.
7 out of 8 wins into Lexi in calling for Swiss or something like that. So the Azuri that did make it top 8, I think hunted a lot of Lexi's down.
Mm-hmm.
But definitely not so much of a problem for Bravo. So that was pretty much it. Any closing remarks with Bravo? You recommend people taking to not sleep on Bravo, or what's your recommendation here?
My recommendation
Copium, hopium.
is just Copium. Bravo is just one of those consistent heroes, but he's not gonna win you the game by himself. Like
No,
the
you
deck's
gotta
not gonna
work.
win for you. You gotta
Yeah,
work. You gotta
yeah,
every single game.
yeah.
Like if you want to just do a
It's like
quick 20-minute
Icelander.
game, oh, I drew 3 of a kind Raven Razors and it's a 15-minute game, I get to go eat lunch. No, no, no. Bravo is like every game goes to time and you're just like, wow, I had to really earn my win there. Then
Yep.
you go into the next one and the next one and the next one.
And it's
Or
an
your
open
deck
event,
just,
so it's like eight
yeah,
Swiss in a row without a break.
yeah. Or their deck just, high rolls and you're just like, well, I mean, now with Starstruck, I would say Bravo can like somewhat realistically like high roll pretty hard,
Yep,
but quite uncommon.
I would say so. Too many blues
But
to
I
like. Yeah, I don't know.
still possible though. If you just change Starstruck, Spinal Crippling, then they're at like 15, and you're like, pretty good.
This deck's not bad. I will say that. Well, I never rate Bravo super highly on like a tier basis, just because of like how quote unquote fair he is. Being one of those Welcome to Wraith heroes. I think the Welcome to Wraith heroes, other than maybe Katsu recently, are just like exceedingly fair. Other than like a
Yeah,
couple overrate thing, a little Blood Rush here, a little Steel Blade there, like a couple
yeah,
cards that break it open. But in reality, most of them are overall pretty fair. Bravo is can be a very relaxing hero. The thought process really isn't super in depth for a lot of your turns. Burning out on this hero is not nearly as common as burning out on Lexi, or burning out on a lot of these heroes where micro decisions will make or break your game easily,
yeah.
like super easily.
Mhm.
Like Bravo has just doesn't have enough decision points to really make you sweat. You just have to make 50 of those dull decision points instead of like 10 of those really crazy ones. So I will say that like Bravo is a fairly relaxing hero, and
Yeah.
I will say the matchup spread is probably the best it's ever been because Starstruck makes you just a little bit better, and that's really all you need to like have a chance into a lot of decks. But I don't think there's any like super doomed matchup like Prism,
Yeah.
like Aura Prism's not running around killing
Prison.
people.
I mean,
All right, I hope. Okay,
okay,
well if
I
you
actually
see,
played against Oliver like what a few days ago, and I was like, wow, this is giving me PTSD.
yeah,
It's
I
just like
don't.
Genesis shit. I'm like, no, but
No,
it's
okay,
honestly it's closer now because they don't have Go again on their heralds and
Yeah. It
what
is
is it?
closer.
32 health. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
much
32
closer.
health is a lot more doable when your attacks come in for a bajillion. You know, it's a thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think Bravo still has that going for him. But
Yeah.
that's about it. Unless you had any last remarks about good old Borvo or whatever the hell people are calling him now. I don't know what people are calling him nowadays. Um, where can people check you out? People want to get in touch with you and leave you comments and
You can find me
fan
at
mail.
Alanlube, either on YouTube or Twitter. I haven't posted a video in a long time, and honestly, that's just because I don't know what to say.
You
I've just
say it
been playing
now.
Bravo. Nothing's changed.
Nothing's
So
changed.
I
Well,
could make another tier list. I'm famous for my tier list, but I
it's
don't know.
true. I mean, biting
I,
at the
I,
charm
I
to do
don't.
one of those tier lists.
It's like it's the cycle of Alanlube. It's like the Bravo copium. It's like, oh yeah, Bravo S tier for sure. And then he does poorly in an event. Next tier list, oh, Bravo's B tier, bottom of the barrel,
Low B.
low B
Just like
tier.
at the very tip of B, which is like the worst, and then it's just like cycling over.
Yep.
Yeah, no, it's fair. So everyone, for all I definitely know we have Bravo viewers in our channels here, Spark of Genius. So go check out Alanlube if you haven't already. Great guy, great opinions, great copium, great fun. And if you guys like this comment, holy moly, my brain's fried. If you like this content, please really like, comment, and subscribe to both channels, so then you'll be notified when Alan posts. Most important thing here. And for that, from wherever you're
Ring the bell
watching,
icon.
ring the bell icon. Oh yeah, I forgot about that. From wherever you're watching in the world, have a good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Bye for now.